Hey guys, so in this video we're going to still be looking at graphing, but what we're going to take a look at is we're going to look at a different form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop up on the screen here is the concept that we're going to be talking about pretty much in this video. So if you notice, in this it's a new format. Most of you guys know this format as factored form, but when we go to graphing we call it intercept form. And I'll get into that in a little bit of why it's called intercept form, but for now, jot this down because this is most of the concepts that you'll need to know, and we'll start to use those. So go ahead and jot those down. I'll put some nice fancy music up again for you guys to look at, and then I'll give you a few examples, and then we'll be good to go. Alright, so we're going to look at this format. We're still going to use the same format that you guys just took notes on, but then we're going to look at this example right here. So in this example we have f of x equals negative quantity x plus 1 times x minus 5. Now this, if I gave this to you originally, you guys would know that this is factored form. Factored form and intercept form are the exact same things. Okay, so if I say factored form or if I say intercept form, really the same thing. But what we want to do first is we're going to find the axis of symmetry. So first, what you guys already know though is the p and the q value. So the p value in this one is negative 1, and then the q value is really 5. So I already automatically know my x-intercepts of this particular graph. Negative 1, 0, and 5, 0. So okay, so that's the first step, is to identify the x-intercepts. Now step 2 is we're going to find the axis of symmetry. So all we have to do is, if you think about it, actually let's put this on a graph first. Let's go ahead. Take your straight edge, let's make a coordinate plane. As you do that, I will do the same thing. Alright, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and plot these x-intercepts, and hopefully you guys can see them on my graph. I know the last graph was kind of difficult to see, but negative 1, 0 would be right here, right? And then 5, 0 would be right here. So I have my 2 points. Now all I really need is my axis of symmetry and my vertex. Now you guys know that the axis of symmetry is going to fall directly in the middle of these 2 points. So you can figure that out using your graph, or you could easily just use what most of you guys know as, actually you might not even know that because it's geometry, so I won't really get into that. All you have to do is take the average of the 2. Right? We're basically just adding them up and cut it in half. So this would be 4 divided by 2, which would be 2. So my axis of symmetry will be directly right here, and that actually makes sense, and you really didn't even need to do that out if you didn't want to. You could really use your graph if need be. So that's the second step. We wanted to find the axis of symmetry, either using the formula that you guys already have, or basically counting values, because you think about it, this point should be the same distance as this point. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3. So you see how that lines up. Alright, so that is the axis of symmetry. So the next thing that we want to do, step 3, is we're going to find the vertex. And you guys already know how to do that, because if we have the axis of symmetry, all I have to do is take that 2 and I'm going to substitute it back in. So I know that 2 and 9 will be my vertex. Now 2 and 9, all I have to do is go ahead and plot 2 and 9. I actually didn't go up high enough, but 2 and 9 would be right here. Hopefully you guys can see that. And now we have enough information to graph. I have 2 points, and I have my vertex. So again, all you have to do is a nice smooth curve. Sometimes difficult to do on a board. I would suggest changing your paper if you need to. What I mean by changing your paper is changing the direction of it, and you should be fine with that. So if you notice, that is your parabola. Now let's take a look too. If we look at the a value, what's the a value? The a value is negative. So doesn't that mean it's a frowny face, which it was. So that's where you can check to see if that makes sense. So that's really all you have to do. So just to reiterate, step 1, we found the x-intercepts. Step 2, we found the axis of symmetry. And then after that, we found the y value of the vertex, and then we graph them. So not too bad, but rewind this, pause it, do whatever you need to do. Make sure you understand this, because again, this is in factored form, which is really intercept form. So if it's in factored form, you can solve it very easily. Now I'm going to do a couple of other examples that are based off of standard form, and then we're going to put it into factored form. Alright, so here's an example. We have f of x equals 2x squared minus 8. Now that's in standard form. It's not in intercept form slash factored form. So you guys know factored form is the same thing as intercept form. So we could actually factor this, and we can actually factor this pretty quickly by factoring out a GCF. And then also looking at that and go, oh, that's a difference of squares. Awesome. So you guys at this point should automatically be able to do this just as quickly as I did, taking this and putting it into factored form, so, or intercept form. It is now intercept form because we're graphing. So that's step 1, put it into intercept form. Then step 2 is really the same process as you did before. Let's find the intercept, so it'd be -2, right, -2, 0, and then this would be 2, 0. So those would be your x-intercepts. So let's go ahead and graph those two. Alright, so we're going to graph -2, which would be over here, -2, and then we're going to go ahead and graph this one over here. Now, a couple different ways how you want to find the axis of symmetry is you can really just look what's in the middle of those two. So the middle of this would actually be x equals 0. Or if you wanted to, you could actually use the formula that you know, p plus q divided by 2, 0 divided by 2 is 0. So axis of symmetry is basically your y-axis. Then from there, the next step is I just have to find the vertex. So all I have to do is take 0, and what we're going to do is we're going to substitute it back into whatever one that you want to substitute it back into. Probably easier to substitute it back into the original in this one if you wanted to. So if I did f of 0, okay, so 0, -8 is your vertex. 0, -8, so I actually didn't go further enough down, but it would be way down here. And then I look and go, my a value is positive, so that does make sense. My graph should be opening up. And then take your time with connecting these, because I know sometimes it's difficult, especially when it's this stretched out. So take your time, adjust your paper where you need to, but make sure you make a smooth curve, and that's what I always have a tough time with, is making it a smooth curve, because it's not a straight line. It's really gradually going to the right and gradually going to the left. So just be careful with that. And then for this one, the domain, I know I didn't talk about that in the last video, but we might ask you the domain. The domain is all real numbers. And then the range, depending on what notation you want to use, I like interval notation, and -8. So this would be y is greater than or equal to -8 in one notation, and then your other notation, interval notation, which I prefer. Oh, I screwed up there. We're going to go from -8, and we're going to go all the way to positive infinity because it's going up. So that would be your domain and your range if we do ask you that. So standard form, but we put it into factored form. So shouldn't be too much of a problem. And then you might say, well, can I just factor it in standard form? Yeah, I'm just showing you different ways that might be easier to do, but really up to you on how you want to tackle these. Just giving you, again, more tools for your toolbox. Okay. All right, and we'll do a couple more examples. All right, so in this example, we have f of x equals the quantity x minus 1 times x plus 2. And what we're really going to do is we're going to find the zeros of the function. Now, when I say find the zeros of a function, what we're really just looking for is the x-intercepts, or the solution. So really, if we're looking for an x-intercept, I know that my y value, or my f of x value, would be 0, right? So really all we would have to do to find our zeros is you would use the zero product property that you guys already know how to use. and we would sit here and just go ahead and solve it. So my zeros of this problem would be x equals 1 or x equals -2. And you guys already can really look at this problem and determine that, because you know your x-intercept is your p-value, right? So your p-value is just 1 and your q-value is -2. So very straightforward to find that once that clicks for you, once you understand your graphing and your factoring and all of that stuff put together, they really tie into one. So if you can remember that your x-intercepts are your zeros are your x-intercepts or your solutions to the problem, then you should be fine. But that is how you find zeros of a function. Alright, so again, we're going to find these zeros of this function. Now the previous example was a lot easier because it was already in factored form, or intercept form, whatever way you want to use that terminology. I like to say factored form when we're actually solving. I use intercept form when we're actually graphing. So this one, not in factored form, so what do? Well, the first step is what we want to do is we want to basically just factor this. Okay, so we have to factor this out, and you guys know that you should always, step one is always factor out a GCF if you can. So I look at all these factors and I know I can take out a -2. So when I do that, I would be left with, this would be a positive, right, and then 6. So once you're here, once you're to this spot, then we just continue to factor. The great thing here, there's an a value of 1, so I can automatically just go right into factored form and go x, both are going to be positive. What multiplies to 6 but adds up to 5, a nice straightforward one, which is great. So now I have this, it's in factored form. Now all I need to do is pretty much set this equal to 0, and we would basically solve this out. So now I would take each factor and set it equal to 0, and solve. And your two zeros, two x-intercepts, your two solutions would be x equals -3 or x equals -2. Now you might say, well, what happens to that -2? You could really just divide that away from it, or you could say 2 is equal to 0, which doesn't really make any sense. So we don't really use that. We just negate that, and you just use these two to find your zeros. So that's how you do it when it's not in factored form. You have to put it in factored form. Alright, so we have a new problem here. This is going to be the last example, so bear with me. We're going to find the zeros of this right here. This is no longer quadratic, it's a cubic, but the skills stay the same. You guys know how to do this. I already know, really, that one of my zeros is going to be 1, but what we want to do is we still want to put it in factored form. That is always your first step. And then you look at this and go, oh, nice. Difference of 2 squares. So I can automatically go ahead and say x plus 4, x minus 4. Right? So this is in factored form. And then from there, I know x, if I use my zero product property, and these are all nice, easy ones. So if you didn't want to sit here and do all that work from this step, I'm okay with you guys just going that you know that x is equal to 1, or x is equal to -4, or x is equal to 4. So this one really has 3 x-intercepts. And this will be a lead-in to basic algebra 2, or stuff that we've seen kind of previously. Think about what that graph might look like if you had 3 x-intercepts. Alright guys, so those are all the examples that we will be doing today. Make sure you pause, rewind, understand this, make sure you come with some questions, do your notes the correct way, put in your summary, questions on the side, keywords, and other than that, let's keep up the good work, and I will see you next time I see you.